The sheer volume of blood found at the home of Nancy Guthrie tells a story that investigators have desperately tried to keep quiet. An unprecedented $1,200,000 reward sits completely untouched. The public assumption has been that this is a hunt for a sophisticated, highly organized abduction team. But the physical evidence left at the front door, it points to something much darker and far less calculated. If you want every development in this case as it happens, subscribe right now, because this story is still moving. It has been almost 4 months later, and the silence surrounding this investigation is deafening. Unverified reports recently suggested that investigators had a specific name they were quietly looking into. But investigative sources closely monitoring the task force have definitively shut those allegations down. There is no secret primary suspect currently in custody. Instead, what the FBI and the local sheriff's office are actually dealing with is an overwhelming influx of unvetted information. When a case reaches this level of national notoriety, the volume of tips creates a dangerous logistical bottleneck. Thousands of leads are pouring into the FBI center and local authorities, including reports that came in over a month ago that are still being processed. It is a terrifying reality of violent crime investigations. The answer is often already in the building, buried beneath a mountain of irrelevant data. Consider the horrific events of 1999, when serial killer Cary Stayner murdered 4 women in Yosemite. Stayner actually mailed a hand-drawn map to the command post detailing where he had left one of the victims. But because the command post was drowning in thousands of incoming tips, that map sat entirely unnoticed in a stack of mail for several days. In the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, agents are prioritizing leads as efficiently as possible. But there is always the lingering dread that the one tip capable of breaking this case wide open is currently sitting in a digital queue, waiting to be read. But the evidence everyone was initially focused on, it wasn't the real problem. What has consistently baffled experts analyzing this case is the severe disconnect between the perpetrator's apparent skill level and their ability to evade capture. This was not a seasoned professional. No experienced weapons handler carries a firearm in a sportsman holster positioned squarely in the front. It is tactically restrictive. It gets in the way. Professionals utilize inside the waistband or appendix concealment. The display of the weapon in that specific manner suggests it was used purely as a crude intimidation tool to gain initial compliance. Furthermore, the suspect appeared genuinely surprised by the presence of a Nest or Ring camera. In a modern residential neighborhood, failing to anticipate residential surveillance is an astonishing oversight. The suspect's reactionary attempt to grab surrounding foliage to block the lens indicates a shocking lack of pre-planning. So how does someone this inexperienced manage to vanish? The answer might lie in a procedural breakdown behind the scenes. In any high-profile investigation, unified command is critical. But unverified reports have pointed to a simmering friction between the local sheriff's office and the FBI, tension that allegedly stems from an unresolved issue dating back several years. When multiple agencies collide on a high-stakes crime scene, jurisdiction can become a liability. The standard protocol for a case of this magnitude dictates that all biological evidence processing be expedited to the most advanced federal facilities available. But that didn't happen here. Instead of sending the recovered DNA evidence directly to Quantico, it was routed to a private lab. Sources indicate that the sheriff subsequently transferred some of his more experienced violent crime investigators completely out of the unit. Do you think the decision to bypass Quantico and send the DNA to a private lab compromised the early investigation? Or was it a necessary move by the sheriff's office to maintain local control. If the next filing changes what we covered today, you'll want to be here for it. Working a violent abduction requires decades of specialized pattern recognition. It cannot be learned from a 40-hour administrative textbook. When seasoned homicide detectives are rotated out, the institutional knowledge required to secure a conviction goes with them. And that lack of continuity is deeply concerning, especially when evaluating the financial realities of this crime. Kidnapping for ransom is statistically incredibly rare in the United States. Federal authorities simply do not get extensive practice working active ransom scenarios because they almost never happen. But when money is involved, loyalty usually shatters. A $1,200,000 reward is a life-altering sum. In the criminal underworld, accomplices will frequently turn on each other to feed an illegal habit for $50. The fact that a reward exceeding $1 million has not triggered a single credible betrayal strongly indicates one chilling reality. There is no partner to flip. The perpetrator who took Nancy Guthrie almost certainly acted alone. If two people were involved, that amount of cash would have fractured their alliance months ago. But a lone operator executing a targeted abduction faces severe logistical hurdles. The neighborhood's layout is notably confusing, heavily hilled, with short distances between intersections, and a street network lacking any intuitive alphabetical or directional grid. It is not an area a predator simply drives through at random in the middle of the night. To approach that specific house, the suspect had to possess specific prior intelligence. They had to know she was there, and more importantly, they had to know she was alone. And while the initial hope was that Nancy Guthrie was being held at a secondary location, the physical forensics found at the front of the house paint a devastating picture. Blood evidence is highly interpretive. A minor injury, a shaving cut, or a slip of a kitchen knife does not produce a heavy volume of cast-off. It is easily contained. But the sheer amount of blood documented at the scene suggests a wound that was bleeding profusely. Combine a heavily bleeding wound with the extreme terror of an armed abduction inflicted upon a senior citizen with a history of poor health. The case seems stalled on this physical analysis until investigators looked at the digital telemetry. What they found inside the medical data effectively closed the timeline. Nancy Guthrie relied on a pacemaker. According to investigative analysis, that pacemaker went completely offline fairly quickly following the initial abduction. The rapid cessation of that medical device, paired with the complete lack of any instantaneous demand for ransom or proof of life, leads to a grim consensus among violent crime experts. The suspect's inexperience resulted in a catastrophic escalation at the door, and she did not survive the initial phases of the crime. Returning remains for a payout becomes far too risky for an amateur operator, which explains the ensuing silence. With the physical and medical evidence pointing toward a tragic conclusion, the task force was forced to systematically eliminate the immediate circle. Whenever a violent crime occurs, law enforcement inevitably turns their focus to the family. It is a necessary, highly sensitive procedure that must be completed to prevent defense attorneys from claiming investigative bias at a future trial. The family of Nancy Guthrie was cleared rapidly. But the methodology used to clear them reveals the depth of the initial probe. Investigators utilize polygraphs. While polygraph results are generally inadmissible in court without mutual consent from both the prosecution and the defense, they are highly effective investigative filters. The mere reaction to the request of a polygraph often signals a subject's level of cooperation. But it goes deeper than a simple machine. Agencies like the California State Department of Justice employ elite polygraph operators. These are interrogators who understand that finding the truth isn't just about reading a chart. It is about establishing a baseline. They don't begin by asking about the murder. They ask pre-reviewed, verified questions, confirming a subject's name or addressing an obvious truth to establish the individual's specific physiological truth-telling style. Some individuals can successfully pass a voice stress analysis, completely masking the tension in their vocal cords. But when subjected to a skilled polygraph operator, their physical deception indicators trigger an immediate red flag, allowing the interrogator to transition a standard test into a full confession. In this case, the polygraphs functioned exactly as intended. The family was definitively cleared, allowing the task force to redirect their resources toward external threats. Which brings the investigation to the most disturbing question of all. Why her? Nancy Guthrie was the definition of a low-risk victim. She had no known gambling debts, she was not involved in high-stakes financial disputes, and she lived a remarkably quiet life. There was nothing to indicate she was a target, except for her proximity to notoriety. Investigative profiling suggests the motive was likely financially based, driven by an obsessive awareness of her daughter, Savannah Guthrie. The suspect may have believed that targeting a family member of a high-profile television personality would guarantee a massive payout. Whether it was an outlier who tracked the family's wealth or someone suffering from an unnatural obsession triggered by Savannah's public commentary, the connection is impossible to ignore. Today, the sprawling task force that initially descended on the case has been streamlined. It is now composed of a couple of FBI agents and dedicated detectives working full-time. While some view this reduction as a loss of momentum, veterans of complex investigations know otherwise. When a major case opens, a massive dogpile of personnel is required to run down hundreds of immediate leads, pull call detail records, and secure search warrants. As those initial avenues are documented and cleared, the required staff hours naturally decrease. The focus sharpens. The procedural streamlining of evidence in this case mirrors the investigative rhythm seen during the apprehension of Scott Peterson, where periods of grueling 16-hour days gave way to highly focused, targeted analysis once the foundational evidence was locked in. But a focused task force cannot undo the reality of what happened on that porch. The tragedy of this case is that a quiet, low-risk woman was subjected to unthinkable violence, not because of anything she did, but because a dangerously inexperienced predator saw her solely as leverage. If this case matters to you, the next development is one you won't want to miss. Whether the tracking data from the suspect's vehicle ever placed them at Nancy Guthrie's address prior to the abduction, and what reverse keyword searches might have revealed in the days leading up to the attack, is a question the task force has yet to answer.